tonight, which is all right. Antonio King is going to talk to us about the yield keyword in Ruby. And Antonio is a recent graduate from the Backend Engineering program at Turing School of Software and Design. So he did the Ruby on Rails track. He's pretty excited about it. And you've been here before, not as a speaker, so we're excited to have you as a speaker now, which is the perfect pipeline of somebody who's like, yes, I'm gonna give a talk and this is gonna be great. So I'll turn it over to you now and take it away.
Sweet, yeah, thanks, appreciate it. Excited to be here. I am posting the slide deck in the chat, so it's got all the resources in the repo. I've uploaded everything, and so let's see if I can share my screen. Desktop. And can you still hear me? Everyone can still see this? Awesome. All right. I talk a lot and I really want to get this under 15 minutes. So shooting for that. All right. Yeah. So my name is Antonio King, pronouns he, him. I'm going to talk about the yield keyword in Ruby today. A little bit about me. I did my undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara in geology and hydrology. When I realized I didn't want to be a geologist, I joined the Navy and I was in the nuclear power program, which is one of the top programs in the military next to Navy SEALs. And I served on a nuclear powered submarine out of Washington State. So I was in the Navy for 6 years, got out in 2017. Moved to Longmont, Colorado at that point, and actually got a job as an acoustical engineer, not like a DJ sound engineer. I actually did environmental noise. So that image in the upper right corner is essentially like a utility plant with generators and whatnot. And I had to create these 3D noise modeling projects to predict what the noise level was going to be at distance and, you know, how it would be impacted by buildings and whatnot. So it's pretty cool. While I was there, I was exposed to a software development firm that was taking all of our engineering processes and creating a user interface for us. We had offices across the country and kind of realized that there was so much I wanted to change about our process, but I just didn't have the resources or the skills or frankly the time to put the effort into that. But I was really, really interested in it. I came across Turing School of Software and Design, and then next thing you know, I completed the Backend Engineering program just this past Thanksgiving. So now I'm, currently applying to jobs, looking, all of that fun stuff, kind of keeping good use of my time. I'm actually a coordinator for the Flatirons LGBTQ Tech Meetup group. I actually also got accepted into the evening MBA program at CU Boulder, which doesn't start until May. And yeah, I mean, other than that, I've got 2 kids. I like hiking, coffee, scuba diving, all that fun stuff. So the agenda tonight, one of the reasons I'm speaking today is I've gotten to know the Ruby community really well. At least I went to Ruby conference, I'd volunteered there. I've been a part of this group since August, and Ruby on Rails was the tech stack we used at Turing School. And frankly, I just found it incredibly fun. And one of the things I love about this group is every time we have a meeting, we always dive into the code and talk about it. And to me, it's just like really inspiring. And I get a lot out of it, even if sometimes it's over my head. But I learned something new recently during a technical challenge and just was excited to share it. It might be new to you, it might not be, but I always appreciate kind of going back to the fundamentals of everything and just seeing like what all I may have missed. So I will go into a few definitions. I'll block functions and the yield keyword. We'll hop into some code, and then I'll briefly explain the technical challenge and the solution. So first off, what is a block function? Pretty straightforward, but essentially it's a snippets of code passed to methods to be executed at a later time, right? And the syntax for a block function is either a do and an end before and after the code, or using curly brackets, or you can even use an ampersand symbol with like a variable name, as I have showed here. Some common examples of when you would see a block function is using the each or the map method, which loops over enumerable objects. And the cool thing about block functions is they can be passed to methods implicitly or explicitly. And so essentially explicitly means that you can store a block function in a variable and include it as like an argument when defining a method. The yield keyword comes into play when we pass blocks implicitly. So when you call on the yield keyword within the method, it will find and call a pass block. So you don't have to include the block as an argument with your method. And so because Ruby allows passing blocks implicitly, you can essentially call any method with a block. If the block is not detected, then yield is either going to ignore, or it's either going to be ignored, or a jump error is going to be raised. This is a lot of words, so I kind of want to switch gears and just look at the code, and we'll go over a bunch of examples. So here I've created a file. Can everyone see this fine? All right, so I created a file called yield, and this is just to show some examples. I've got an array 1 and array 2. Array 2 is just an empty array, but like I said, each is probably the common form in which we see applying a block function implicitly, right? The do and the end. And so when I call on this, it's going to return an array of 2, 4, and 6 into the array number 2. If we take a closer look at the each method and really break it down and see what's under the hood, you're basically creating an index, or setting it to 0, and then using a loop, so the while, so based on the size of the array that you're iterating over, and then calling on this yield keyword to grab whatever block function that you're passing when using the each method. And then anytime it iterates over an element at a certain index, it executes that pass block function and then outputs whatever you want. And so in this case, you know, when you're defining the each method, there's no argument is given because we are passing the block implicitly. And this is, as I have described right here, you know, we're calling on array number 1 using the each method, and then curly brackets, that is the block function that we're passing implicitly. I don't want to spend a ton of time discussing proc, but I did want to briefly explain how to pass a function implicitly. And so, explicitly. And so one of the things that I provided some resources on, they all discuss proc, but if you want, what that means is if you want to assign a block function to a variable that you can call on and include it as an argument. So here I'm using the ampersand symbol and block. I mean, block can be any name, but this is the exact same method as what we saw with each. The only difference is now I'm using a block function as an argument, and I'm able to call on that as a variable within the method. So now I use block, and then I can use the call method on it and essentially do the same thing. When you use this ampersand though, it actually automatically converts that block function to a proc. And in Ruby, there's a built-in class method to, you know, assign block functions to variables. And so a way to briefly kind of understand what that means is I've created another method, or run proc with a random number, and I've created an argument, and here I'm able to call on that argument variable. Here though, when I say up here like block automatically converted to a proc, here I actually have to define or create an instance of a proc, you know, so block is equal to proc.new, and then whatever block function I want to add assign to that variable. The better way to do this though is just defining a method and then using the ampersand, which automatically does that, kind of like what I showed. And then you can, you know, just go ahead and call on that method, and then whatever you want, whatever block function you want to assign to that proc. So if I, go ahead and run this, I'm going to get the same result either way, but using that ampersand is kind of like the easiest way. That's the extent at which I want to talk about passing blocks explicitly. But one thing I did want to note is in the articles, it does mention while it's useful to have the proc in the method, in some situations, the conversion of a block to a proc produces a performance hit. So whenever possible, you should use implicit blocks instead. So yeah, so now we can kind of dive into exactly what the yield function does. Let me go ahead and comment these out. So this is very high level, but one way we can use yield, I've created 2 methods, one called one yield, another called multiple yields. And so it's as simple as passing the yield keyword inside the method. So if I go ahead and call the method name and then pass a block function implicitly, right? I can go ahead and run this. And so for one yield, it returns one yield. For multiple yields, it returns multiple yields. Another interesting thing about using the yield keyword is whether or not to have an optional yield call. So right now, if I were to call on this optional block method, but not pass an block function implicitly, I'm going to get an error, right? Because in order to use the yield keyword, it's looking for a block function. The way to get around that is if you use this block given keyword. And so now I can go ahead and run this, and the error doesn't show up anymore. And in fact, like, it does process the method, but the value is no. And just to prove that I put this optional block, is it no? And it's true, right? So and then these last two are kind of important. The main reason that I wanted to get to this is, so with the yield keyword, you can pass or assign yield to a return value. So I've got this method yield with a return value. Return value is set to the value of yield, and and then I want to output whatever the return value is. And so in that case, I'm calling on the method, and I've basically set yield to a value of a string. So if I were to go to run that, it's going to just reprint the string. Another cool thing is yield. You can pass arguments to yield. So if I have a method called yield with arguments, I have two variables, A and B, hello world, and then I can add those variables as arguments along with yield. So when I call yield with arguments, I'll have to incorporate like a 2-block argument or a 2-argument block, and then however I want to spit this out. So if I go ahead and run this, I'm essentially 2 different ways of printing hello world, the same thing, right? So that is a very high level view of how to use the yield keyword. This technical challenge that I worked on was a collaborative technical challenge, and it basically went over the built-in merge function for Ruby, and how if you have 2 hashes, let's say one of them A equals 1 and the other one A equals 2, when you use the merge function, it basically works on a last one wins semantics. So by merging the 2 together, since there are 2 keys for A, then A now equals 2. But what if we wanted to create a method where the value of the key is customizable? So you can either sum the values, you can concatenate, you can subtract. And so the technical challenge was write a method called merge with that takes 3 arguments, a #1, #2, and then a 2-argument block specifying the process that should be used to combine the value of any matching keys. So I went ahead and created all of my tests based off of this information. So I've got 3 tests here that, to add the values, to subtract, and to concatenate what I would expect. And then just as an example, I took my tests, I wrote my tests based off the example that was given, right? Here's this merge with method, and then I've got #1, A equals 1, and then #2, A equals 2, and B equals 1. And then now I'm implicitly defining a block function to go along with that. But I want that to be customized as I write the code, right? So see if I can. So right now I am trying to wrap this up. So if I run rspec, I have 3 failures, right? 3 tests. And this is because I've commented out the code that I'm actually using, and I'm having it just return this new hash that I'm trying to add everything into. So right now it just only sees an empty hash. Now that we know about the yield keyword and how to use it, what I've done is we want to create a new hash, add items into it. So I create another variable for all the keys and #1 and #2, group them together, create an array, and then remove any duplicate values. And then I want to iterate through these all keys now and decide, does a key exist in #1 and in #2? And if it does, I want to create that new key in my new hash and use the yield method to call on whatever block function is being passed implicitly, and then taking the value of that key in #1 and the value of the key in #2 and adding them together, doing whatever. And then if it doesn't exist in both of them, then it either just passes along the value from either hash, right? And so when I go ahead and run this, all of my tests pass. So this was just a really interesting technical challenge. Apparently for front enders, it's pretty common to do this, especially in JavaScript. I guess there might be like a callback function, and this is something that is commonly used. I don't know what that's like for a backender, but my group and team, we're all pretty like taken like off guard by this approach. We've just not really, I mean, in hindsight, yes, each and map are very used to doing that, but we've just never really created a method where you've had to, use this yield keyword and call things implicitly and like attach a block function to it. And so for me, it was just a really fun experience. And, I thought it would be really cool to just dive in some code for my first lightning talk. But yeah, I went ahead and shared this slide deck. These are all of the resources and articles and YouTube videos that I watched to kind of study up on this. I did upload this onto GitHub as a repo, so you have access to it. But yeah, I want to just go ahead and say thank you. And this was really exciting to finally present for the first time. So does anyone have any questions? I feel like I hit this on a very high level, even for me, where I tried to dive deep and I figured out how to like solve a technical problem using the yield keyword. However, I am still like really interested in exploring it in a more practical sense. And I'm curious if like this is something that any of you use regularly. And so yeah, maybe at some point I would definitely love to like chat about that a little bit more.
I got a question for you. You mentioned that there was a bit of a performance hit whenever you switched from, was it block to explicit proc? Or where was the, or I forgot what the phrasing was and where it was, but you said there's a performance hit in one format over the other. Do you know how big that is? Is it?
I have no idea. Yeah, no. I heard it mentioned in a few of the YouTube videos, and then I saw it in the article, and I was like, I'm just going to throw it out there. But
it's small, but what it is that when you are capturing the block into a variable, there is an extra step because there's an extra allocation essentially that's happening in order to allow you to capture it that doesn't happen in an implicit yield. And so if you were in like a tight loop or it's something that's going to be used a bunch, you might want to, it might be worth your time to see if you can use just a yield versus a captured block. But captured blocks are really, really useful sometimes, and it's most of the time not worth worrying about.
But it sounds like it's whenever you assign it to a new variable, that's what the performance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's just when you're capturing it. Yeah.
Yeah, same reason you would use like tap or something else that doesn't need a new variable. You just deal with what's there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so surprised my kids left me alone for that amount of time.
Minor miracle. My dog bothered me twice, so awesome. Any more questions for Antonio? Seems good. I found it really interesting. I love the like deeper dives into how you would use something like that. It's like a really nice refresh, or sometimes you're just like, oh, that is how it works. That's great. Thank you so much.